Hey gang, Ronan here. Welcome on back to the Retrocade and welcome to another edition of WTF Wednesday. The feature where we go back in time and examine games that on paper seem like a good idea, but in actuality turned out to be not quite so much. And for this week, we're going to play one of my favorite arcade games of all time, but we're going to play the Nintendo Entertainment System port from 1987. We're going to play Spy Hunter. Now, how this game works is pretty simple. You are a secret agent at the wheel of this fancy red and white interceptor car. And you have to think about it in terms of it's like every other secret agent movie where your car has all these gadgets and all these abilities to do things. Now, as you see, I haven't started off yet, but you will have other cars that will be passing me. What you want to avoid is these dark blue ones. The dark blue ones are the baddies. There will be other cars on the road that you will see, like that little blue one, the light blue one. You don't want to hit those. Those are passengers. You don't want to hit the motorbikes. And there are two things you have to keep in mind. One of them is the 3-digit number at the bottom that's 3 nines. That is a timer. And what you need to do is you need to be able to get to, I believe it's 20,000 points before that timer runs out so you can get an extra player. Otherwise, if you don't have that number and the timer runs out and you crash, it's game over. It is one life, one play, game over if you wipe out. And you can crash by crashing off the road. You can run into the backs of different cars. Your car can get hit by enemies. There's a million ways you can get killed. So the reason why I want to play this game and to be able to start, all you have to do is you hit the up trigger on your controller and you start moving forward. Down hits the brakes. Your A button is your machine guns, and then you can pick up special weapons from red semi trucks that you will see throughout this playthrough. Now these guys in these little cars, you want to be careful of them because they have tire shredders that pop out and can blow up your tires and make you crash. As already, I immediately wipe out. Now the limos have snipers in them that will shoot out the back window, and if you're not careful, they will take you out. If they hit you right, you will spin and you will crash. Now the big bulky cars, let's see if I can get them to pass me by here. Their back bumpers are bulletproof. So you have to knock them off the road if you don't have any special equipment. Now, you never run out of bullets with your machine gun, which is a nice little trick to have. But the big thing you want to be able to do is you want to be able to get in the back of... as I crashed. I want to be able to get in the back of this truck because you get specific items depending on what's on the back. And in this case, and you'll see it on the left-hand corner, that blinking letter O means I have an oil slick. Now, you don't have infinite amounts here. As I crash, and that's it, so game over. This is a game that you can really play and end in like 5 minutes. But here's why I wanted to be able to play it today. Because 35 years ago, this was one of the first examples of a game that had a major issue that has come to plague modern gaming, full stop. And that is this. This game was only partially done. There is no way to actually complete the game because it's an arcade port, and you have to remember that 35, 40 years ago, arcade ports were all about the idea of getting kids in confined spaces to play games and pop as many quarters into the arcade cabinets as humanly possible. Come on, get in there. Let me in. Now you can, if you're not careful, lose the ability to get into the truck. So that little beep let me know, because I got 10,000 points as the timer ran out. So now that little car I have down at the bottom gives me an extra guy. And every time you take a civilian out, your ability to accumulate points pauses for a second. So it behooves you not running civilians and bystanders off the road. Now I want to get into that truck because this truck has missiles. And now that I have missiles, that little clatter you hear is the sound of a helicopter. Now, along with having no real end to this game, Spy Hunter is also notable because of its soundtrack. It was one of the first games... as I finally crashed. But Spy Hunter was one of the first games that had a soundtrack from an actual source. In this case, the soundtrack came from an old 1950s detective show, as I crash and it's game over, called Peter Gunn. Which was part of the reason why they were able to use it 30 years later, because, you know, they originally wanted to use the James Bond theme, but of course, James Bond being a lot more popular, being able to utilize the theme music was going to be way more expensive. But the catch in this game is that when it was originally advertised for the Nintendo Entertainment System, what you see on the cover of the game is you see the car, you also see an airplane, you see the motorcycle, you also see a boat, and you see a rocket. But the only thing you do in this game is you drive around in the car, and you have to get to a certain point where you transition into a boat. And then from there, if you can last long enough, you go from the boat back to the road and drive around and then get back in the boat. But there is no end to it. You never get any further than this in this entire game. It all becomes a question of how high a score you are managed to achieve. Which nowadays seems loony. Until you think about all the games that have come out, all the AAA titles and all the other games that have come out for various consoles over the years. That weren't finished either. Now, I am unabashed in my love of the game Skyrim, but it also cannot be ignored that that game, when it first was released, had no end of bugs in it. And Bethesda, in their infinite wisdom, decided, well, we'll just release the code, we'll release the source code, and we'll let the actual players fix it. See if I can do this again here. I'm only 9 minutes into this. This may not be a very long episode. I want to see if I can at least get to the boathouse. But, again, my point being in regards to what Bethesda did with Skyrim is you can make the argument that, to their credit, by releasing the source code to the community, all the mods that have been released in the years since Skyrim came out, and it's been out for a decade now, have not only made the game better, but it took out a lot of the bugs that were initially in the release title. What stinks is that has become much more of the trend in modern video games, whereas back in the 8-bit generation and the 16-bit generation, it very much behooved game companies to release titles that were ready to go. You didn't have the luxury of putting a game out and then having a patch come out or releasing updates, because you have to bear, and it's funny that I found out that it was 30 years ago this week that the internet essentially was born. That what was classified as the World Wide Web and what we know nowadays as the internet became public domain this week in 1993. And I'm of the last generation of humanity, really, to have grown up and lived a significant portion of my life without the internet. In 1993, I was still in I was just I was in high school. Now, I have friends of mine who are millennials who also had and I got shot and away I went. But, you know, the idea that nowadays, there are so many kids who don't know a world without the internet. Well, I went from having 3 guys to being completely game over in about 2 minutes, and that's how fast the momentum can change in this game. But there are other examples of this happening even back in the 8-bit generation, where games were... there was such a rush to get content out like there is today. You know, it's the demand hasn't changed. If anything, it's gotten more concentrated over the years. And gamers have gotten significantly less patient. Not that they were ever a real patient lot to begin with. I remember hearing about games that I was really excited about and then being told, you mean I gotta wait how long to have it potentially available to buy and play? Are you kidding? I want to be able to play it now. And I suppose a part of that was growing up in the last great era of the arcade, where you went in and the games were all there. You know, you didn't have to worry about... oh, come on, I need to get him off the road. There we go. You didn't need to have to worry about waiting for when, like, Donkey Kong or Zaxxon or X-Men or The Simpsons or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was going to come out in the arcade, because if the cabinets were there, then you just had to have the means by which to be able to play them. But as the gaming community's gotten only more voracious over the decades, you know, obviously game designers have felt the pressure to push their teams to well past the limit of what is even remotely feasible, if it means that they can get a title out and then deal with whatever issues come up later. Like, one of the games I was really interested in 2-3 years ago was Cyberpunk 2077. I still haven't played it yet. I haven't played a lick of it. Well, that was brilliant, Holmes. In no small part because of all the issues it had at launch with bugs and non-playability, and depending on which system you were playing it on, what sort of issues you were going to have with it. And I just simply haven't gotten around to trying it out. From what I hear, with what's been done with it, it's still got a few quirks, but on the whole, it's a viable game now. Now, one of the most obvious examples of this was the game No Man's Sky, which I bought on day one for my PS4. In fact, it was the reason I got a PS4. I was so hyped about it. Now, you don't have to be a great scholar of video games, I'm not claiming that I am, to understand that and know that No Man's Sky is one of the most maligned titles of the last, I would say, of the last decade easily, because of what happened when it was launched. It was a far, far cry from what Hello Games said we were going to get, especially based off of the previews and all the hype that had gone into it prior to its launch. Now, the difference being is that to Hello Games' credit, and I'm not saying this to be glib, but they understood that they made such a catastrophic error in doing that. Bust out the smoke screen, that'll be helpful. So I can get by this guy here. Oop. There we go. That in the now 5 years since, they've completely overhauled the game multiple times, and it is so much better than what we got at launch. Now, if you want to be able to come up with a justifiable excuse for why Spy Hunter was a game that does not have anything more than 2 stages and no way to, quote, beat it, unquote, is that because it was an arcade port, and because the whole mindset of games like this was totally different back in the early to mid 80s, where games were still predominantly focused on how high a score can you get. It wasn't about having a definitive story or spending acres and acres of time on plot and characterization and puzzles and, you know, things like that. It was just simply, here's a cool idea. How can we turn this into something the kids are going to want to spend as much of their pocket money as possible to dump quarters into, and that will ultimately prove the return on our investment. Now you can make the argument that, there we go, that in this regard, that the ends justify the means because of it. I lost my oil slick and my missiles because I couldn't hit that helicopter. Now, because this game actually proved to be as popular as it was, both in the arcades and on consoles, they have done sequels to it. Most notably, as I double check my notes here really quick, they did do Spy Hunter 2, they did Super Spy Hunter, and then when we got to the 32-bit generation, they updated it and came out with more modern versions for the PS1 and Xbox and things like that. I mean, this game was ported to multiple systems. Because not only was it on the Atari, it was on the Amiga, it was on the Atari 2600, it was on the Atari 8-bit, it was on the MSX, it was on the Spectrum, it was on the Apple II, it was on the ColecoVision, and the ColecoVision is an ancient system by modern standards. And it was on the IBM, the PC, and of course the NES. And that's just this version. So because it wasn't a complicated game to make, that also helped the developers port it over and bring more money into the franchise. But to this day, this is still the only version of this game that I have ever played. Outside of the arcade, obviously. Now, for NES players, if you were lucky enough to get with your Nintendo Entertainment System the Nintendo Player's Guide, the Player's Guide had a map that you could try to follow, but you had to memorize it, really, that showed the different forks on the road and how you could get to the boathouse. But as you can see, there's no map. There are no indicators to tell you that this is the route you have to take. You are simply freewheeling it in the hopes that you will get to a point where you will see the boathouse off to the side of the road. It's on the left. But it's also really, really easy to drive right by it. And if you drive by it, then you have to start all over again from the beginning of the map. It's not game over, but essentially it loops you back around. Now let's see if I can get another. I think it's 30 grand. Yep, I did get an extra player. Okay. Whoa! They shredded my tires out, and now I've got a glitch. See if I can get in the truck. Ha! Uh-oh. So I'm essentially invincible at the moment because I can't, until I crash. Well, there I went. As I say, up until the second I crashed, I was still spitting out. Which is the darndest thing I have ever seen, and I suppose that is as good a place to end it as I can. So that, in a nutshell, is Spy Hunter for the Nintendo Entertainment System from 1987. And also from the arcades of 1983. I would have loved to have seen a version of this game with this top-down setup that was completed. I would have liked to have seen what would have happened if you got past the boathouse and then took a plane, and then if you had to go, you know, stop a rocket or whatever. There was so much potential that was in this game that could have been added to it, but you also have to think of the limitations of the time, in that because the games were not the monolithic multi-gigabyte, terabyte structures they are now, there was only so much you could cram into a chip to be able to play on an arcade cabinet or in a Nintendo Entertainment System console or an Atari console or an IBM or ColecoVision console. So once you take that out of it, then, you know, it makes a little bit more sense, but at the same time, this is still the most obvious example to me of a title that, because it was never truly finished, I felt like we kind of got robbed as gamers, even though we got exactly what was in the arcade in a slightly different presentation. So, I mean, is it a bad game? No. If you like this sort of game, then you can have a lot of fun with it. The soundtrack, is not terrible. It doesn't play the whole time, and it is, as you saw, it is challenging, but it could have been. I look at it the same way I look at the Return and Death of Superman that we played for Sucker Punch Sunday 2 weeks ago. It could have been so much more, even if they had added 10% more. But it's what it is. So if you've enjoyed this, and I hope you have, easiest way to show that is to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you are new, ring the bell to be notified for the latest content. Remember, we will have Sports Saturday and Sucker Punch Sunday coming up again this weekend, where we will play a sports and fighting or fighting platform-based game from the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th generation. You can also follow us on Instagram at Ronin's Retrocade and help spread the word about us so we can get to our goal of 100 subscribers as soon as we can. That way we can unlock the YouTube customization algorithm and make this channel bigger and better. And huge thank you to the subscriptions that I have received in the last week. I am still seeing the numbers go up. That is a big, big help for me as far as knowing that the community I'm hoping to grow here is possible and is starting to head in a slightly upward trajectory. I know it's going to be a fully organic process, and I'm not trying to force the issue, but obviously that comes with the more content I can put out for you guys to enjoy. Hopefully, the better it's received. And speaking of that, if there is a game you would like to see us feature from the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Super Nintendo, the Sega Master System, Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, SNK Neo-Geo, Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1, or PlayStation 2, leave it in the comments below or drop me a line on Instagram, and it could be any game from those systems that you guys want. As always, my name is Ronin. It's been great to spend this Wednesday with you. Be safe, be well, happy gaming, and we'll talk to you again this weekend. Bye!